In my last film, I showed you how I made 4 bookmarks inspired by Van Gogh's Starry Night. A couple were fairly literal, a slice of the painting, and a couple were just a starry night sort of landscape. I thought, wouldn't it be nice to do something a bit more literal maybe? Perhaps I could paint my own version. But I didn't want to just do a watercolour, I wanted something with texture. And let me put that a little bit closer. Can you see, I hope, that rather than just having strokes of watercolour, there are ups and downs here. My name is Liz Chatterton. I'm a watercolour artist based in Berkshire, and every week I share tips and tricks I wish I'd known about ages ago. This week I want to show you how I created this textured version of Starry Night, but in watercolours, not oil paints. I thought, oh, I'll use modelling paste. Yeah, that'll be great. And as always, I just did a quick search on YouTube and found out that Emily Olsen had done exactly what I planned, which was a round panel with modelling paste on. Well, I couldn't just replicate that then, could I? So I came up with a different plan. Still wanted to use a round panel. This is a wooden panel. You could, of course, use it square. You can do this on paper. Do your own thing. Instead of using modelling paste to create my textured panel, what I've done is use some textured wallpaper. I happen to have this from a collage project and I thought actually that would be fun. So really easy. I stuck the paper onto the panel just using PVA glue, flipped it upside down, very sharp knife, trimmed it into place, and then I have put a couple of coats of watercolour ground on this. And if you don't know what watercolour ground is, it's like an absorbent gesso. You put it on any surface and it allows the watercolour to flow a bit like it does on watercolour paper. Not exactly the same, but a bit. And that's what I'm going to use. I thought I've got some texture and I'm hoping that the watercolour will flow through the hills and valleys in a really interesting way. And there is only ever one way of finding out whether this is going to work, and that is to actually do it. I have Van Gogh's Starry Night on my iPad there to refer to. And obviously I'm going to have to adapt it because this is a round board rather than a rectangular canvas. Thought I would use watercolour pencils just to sketch out my composition. So if I find a dark blue pencil, that should work, because then the watercolour pencil will just dissolve away. So for me, that tree is terribly important because it's so structural. This is going to be interesting. Can you hear that noise as it goes across? So there's sort of a cypress tree. Let's make that. And I love the waves of the hills in the background. So they sort of come round. And go off there. And then we've got the little village nestling down here. You really love the church. If you watch my bookmark video, I said I really regretted not using the church as my building just because that spire is rather gorgeous. So let's put the spire there and make sure it breaks through the hill. So I might make that hill a little bit smaller there. Make sure that comes through, and then we'll do some random sort of buildings, because the nice thing about these buildings at the bottom is that they've got the flashes of yellow where the light is coming out of the windows. That's quite nice because the yellow here echoes the yellow in the stars. Actually, copying and working from a famous painting is good because I expect we all know the Starry Night, but I bet you never really looked at it. I'd never realised the waves of the hills. And then we've got these sort of trees, which are again very wave-like. And of course, you've got the waves in the sky. And just by copying it rather than just glancing at it, or not copying, I mean, being inspired by it, whatever you like to say, just makes you look a bit closer. Start with sky. I'm not masking anything. I will just leave blanks where I want the stars to be. I'm going to do a wash that can cover the trees because the trees are so dark. Lots of that blue can come down into the foreground, but I'm going to leave white areas sort of on the roof and some white areas on the trees. That is my plan. Let's think what colours we might want to use. Indigo. Got to have some indigo. That is Prussian blue already. I think lots of ultramarine, phthalo. So loads of blues. I've got a bit of quin gold there, lemon yellow. Run out of space, we'll worry about that in a moment. I'm going to use a pretty big brush and mix up some nice creamy washes. Using a synthetic brush because anytime you work on watercolour ground, even if it's on a flat surface, it's really rough on your brushes. And here we've got this highly textured surface, so you know it is going to be tough. I wouldn't use a natural hair. Right, let's see how this works. I have never done this before, so obviously if it's a total nightmare, you'll never see it. If it turns out okay, I will share it. Loving, look at that, how the texture's showing through that wash. That's just Prussian blue. Bung in some indigo, really make that dark. And pop, I want this darker and coming light to the horizon. I'm going to leave a star here, star there, star here, and a couple of stars there. Maybe we'll have a cluster. And then just let's bring some water down. Say we can go right over where the tree is going to go. That's not a problem. I've just really been enjoying working on a circular canvas or circular board recently. Sort of the different shape totally makes you think in a different way. You're feeling a little stuck in a rut. An extra star here. Do think about changing your surface up a little. Change to a new watercolour paper, change to a new shape, a new size. It'll help you paint in a different way and maybe see life in a little different light. Definitely want, just warmer. That is putting wet in wet, my French ultramarine. I don't think I'll be able to get as distinct, oh, maybe I will. I was going to say as distinct swirls. But look at that. That's so pretty. I'm really excited. There's a bit of phthalo blue with more indigo. Look how it just wiggles through the texture. My advice to you if you're working on watercolour ground is do not rely on being able to add layers and glazes because it lifts very, very easily. So try and get your colours as close tonally as you want them to be first time. So the closer you get it to what you fancy first time, the easier it is for you. What I do want to do is just use a clean damp brush and soften the edges. This is where my star's going to be. Now, because it is easy to lift, I can use that property to my advantage. It can be a disadvantage, it can be an advantage. So I could just use a bit of tissue and just soften around like that. Or even when it's dry, you'll find that it's very easy to lift. I want to bring down into the hills. But I need to leave. I'm not going to get crisp edges with this, am I? Because it's just going to feather through the valleys of the texture. But as far as possible, I need to leave the church spire. Let's get in where the hills might be. So here, these are the trees, and they're sort of, again, they're in waves. So what I'm going to do is just using the tip of this big brush, leave some white areas and work around the trees. Just see what those look like when they're dry. While it is damp, remember this darker area is my hills, I can use a damp brush, just lift off a little of the colour. Got a nice soft path of light on the horizon. Maybe I could do a little like this to create some glows around my stars. So the final thing I'm thinking is maybe just a little bit of, so that's my hill, isn't it? Yeah, a little bit of yellow, just a smidge down near the horizon. Right, I've got some swirly whirly sky, some swirly whirly stars, definitely leaving out the moon, start of a village, bit of hills going on. I think I need to leave it alone and see what it looks like when it's dry. So I think the next bit is to do the cypress trees here. So we've got the main one going up and then the smaller. This is warm sepia, and then I've got some, this is green gold. This is going to be my under drawing as such. Let's see what happens. So I'm really not trying to be totally true to the painting, just true to the feeling of the painting. One thing I'm going to have to think about, I'm not quite sure of the answer just yet, is what to do with the sides of this panel. I think I may paint them all in sort of blues, except for down here where the tree comes, and I could continue, can you see that? Just continue the image there. That might be the best bet. If you have a go at this, one thing you may notice is it uses a lot of paint. I think because of that texture, it really seems to gobble through the paint, so do mix up a little more than you might anticipate. Let's drop some of that green gold in there. Drop in some Prussian blue while it's wet, and that will start to darken it down. Just thought if I bring this over the village a little bit more, compositionally, that would be a bit better. I could carry on working in the sky. Now, how are we going to do this? Let's swap to a smaller brush. Might be okay. Maybe even that one. Getting very creamy mix of that Prussian and trying some sort of individual marks. See what we think to those. So these aren't crisp marks because of the texture. What I'm going to do is make sure I bring some of the blue marks into the edges of the stars, just to integrate them a little bit more. Right, while those are drying, I'm going to work on my stars. I'm using very strong, hardly any water in this at all, of lemon yellow to give those a bit of a zing. Good thing about lemon yellow is that it's quite an opaque colour anyway. So I can almost dry brush it over to pick up some of that texture. What we haven't got is white to bring some of the starlight into the surrounds. So if you haven't left enough white, we're going to have to think of a way of doing that. We might be able to lift it off, or we may have to resort to a little bit of gouache, or a little, maybe use an opaque acrylic pen. I don't know yet, but my mind is going that direction. Now, what I'm looking at is that the hills have got some real dark on them, so I'm going to mix up the darkest dark I can, which is going to be my warm sepia and either my Prussian blue or my indigo. Dark and strong, not a lot of water in there, and the hills are sort of outlined. They sort of curve over, say almost like a wave in itself. And then they've got dark lines. Sort of the shading, or to show the form of the hills. And we could use some of that dark mixture to outline the church. And start getting in some windows. So just dragging the thick paint over that bumpy surface to get sort of rough marks. And just define a few of the houses. Might put, that's sort of very dry brushing. Oh, actually that's quite nice, isn't it, for a bit of texture in the roof. And then in these trees here, or the forest, I'm noticing more of these dark wavy marks. So let's get some of those in. Of course, this is in moonlight, so let's mellow down some of the whites we've left without taking them all. And I think we need to let that dry so we can put on more layers of marks in the sky and start to do more layers of marks in these trees in the foreground. Just gone and grabbed some cerulean blue because it's very opaque blue. So I wonder if that might work to our advantage at this point. Let's mix it up to be workable. I'm not going to use it full out of the tube, but let's see what that does for us. I'm hoping it's going to sort of sit on top and give us an extra sort of dimension and mark. So I'm putting extra layers of marks into the sky. Put some more detail on my little imagined village and into the trees. Got a tube of Chinese white as well. So let's see what that will do. So I prefer to keep this all watercolour if I possibly can, rather than, say, going in with acrylic or gouache. I'm quite liking this effect. Because it's watercolour, it's sort of will blend in a bit more. If it's wet underneath, it will run, and it's not fully opaque, so it's quite fun. Now, are my trees dry? Still a bit wet, but I'm going to go back in with that really strong, or as strong as I can make it, and still have it workable, dark. So that was my Prussian blue and my sienna. Well, I might just bung everything in there, to be honest. These are a lot longer marks than the trees. Get that feeling of the cypress trees growing through the... Just use some dry brushing as well to blend some of the light areas that I left. Bring a little bit more light into maybe the ends of the trees. That was just the Chinese white, just to bring in some of that. Right, let's grab some of that lemon yellow and put the lights on in the village. And look, I am using it pretty much neat out of that tube. Just grabbing a super dark creamy mix. I'm going to add a little bit more to my trees. Remember, if you want an area to look lighter, you can either lighten it or you can put darker by the side and we see things in contrast. Really, you can do as much of this or as little as you like until you get bored of this game. And now I'm just going to use my leftover blue paint around the sides. When you're convinced you're finished and you're happy with the effect you've got and it's all dry, we need to think about sealing this, because that watercolour will lift off really, really easily. The way I like to seal it is to use a wax. You can use Dorland's wax, which is the fine art wax, or because this is a bit of fun, I'm going to use furniture wax. It's clear and odourless, and you can just rub it on, let it dry, and then give it a gentle buff, and it will actually enhance the colours and indeed seal it all. So I'm going to have to rub it on, I think, in small circles to really get into that texture. It won't smear the watercolour because watercolour is not wax soluble, it is water soluble, and there is no water in this wax. You could use a spray varnish very easily, but it needs something. I say watercolour on a watercolour ground lifts incredibly easily, and one spilt cup of tea, or I don't know, an explosion of water, this would just all run and rub off, and that would be a shame. How long it takes to dry will totally depend on how warm it is where you are, or how dry or humid the atmosphere is. And because it's quite thick in places, because it's going to sink into the texture, I think this might take quite a long time to dry. So I'll leave it overnight, And then just take a soft cloth and give it a good rub. And don't forget those sides either. Once the wax is dry, just grab a cloth and give it a gentle buff like this, and it'll just give a slight sheen to the tops of the texture, and your painting is ready to hang. Hope you really enjoyed that. And now it's time to think how different textures can bring a new dimension to your watercolours.